Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Bolin and Charles Laughlin.
Welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin, Senior Analyst at Localogy. Today, I'm joined by Matt Marx, who's CEO of Evolcalize. Matt, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing great, Charles. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome back, I should say, to This Week in Local. You're a previous guest. Today, we have a very specific thing to speak about. Yesterday, we're recording Thursday, the 14th of December. Normally, I don't say what day we're recording, but I think it matters here because yesterday, on the 13th, the FCC, the U.S. Federal Communications Commission, issued a 4-1 ruling to do something which people are just sort of calling closing the lead generation loophole. Did I get that right?
You got it.
So, Matt, you wrote something on LinkedIn earlier this week, kind of sending up a red flag, I guess, saying this thing is about to happen and it's going to have consequences. So I'm going to rely on you to explain to us what the lead generation loophole was, as you understand it, and as is commonly understood. And then we'll get into why closing it is an issue. Let's just start there.
Yeah, sounds great. So just backing up a little so folks know, if you're not familiar with the TCPA is simply the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. It was started in way back in 1991, and it was literally meant for landline phones. So to issue spam laws to prevent an overwhelming of landline phones back in all the way back in 1991, and it's been adapted over the years to incorporate more modern communication techniques like emails and text messaging and robocall or automated phone calls that happen between businesses and consumers. And so this there's always been what they're calling the loophole here that's been closed is the ability for a company to collect one consumer identity or one lead and then go and sell it to lots of different parties that may or may not have been expected to receive the lead by the consumer, who then all call and text the consumer or sometimes email the consumer at once, which results in the consumer getting frustrated because lots of listeners probably have heard this, seen this. I certainly have as a consumer. All of a sudden you get spam, spam hitting your phone. So
I think
not
we've all
just
been
the
through that
lead
at
you
least
wanted.
once.
At least once, right? So that's
Okay.
the loophole they're closing, is this idea of one to many. I submit, as a consumer, I submit my lead once to an aggregator, and then they're selling it to lots of parties at once. And we can get into what they're requiring and what that means, but that's the piece they're trying to close.
Okay, so what measures did they take in order to close this loophole? I mean, the idea, I think, is to reduce the amount of spam or perceived spam that people are receiving. I think that seems to be the objective on the consumer's behalf. Fair enough. But what did they actually do? And then we'll get into what the consequences will be in your view.
That's right. So you can think of it very simply as the rule now requires one-to-one consent from the consumer to the business that will contact them. So that can take a number of forms, but the requirement is I, as a consumer, am submitting my lead expressly to a named business in advance when I submit my lead, and no one else. So we can talk about, they gave some examples of how lead aggregators might adjust, and we can talk about that in terms of the remedy section. But that's, if you think about it, it's quite simple. They're literally saying one-to-one consent-based communication, one-to-one is required starting in the future.
So that it just really upped the ante on consent considerably. Is that a fair way to summarize it? And so I think really the brass tacks here is, what impact will it have on your customers? And your customers, just to be clear, at least to one degree, are business owners, and you work heavily with franchise business owners. I don't know if that makes a huge difference in terms of the outcome here. Maybe you can explain if it does. But what do you think is going to be the impact to small business? And then how will kind of the lead generation landscape change as a result, in your view?
Yeah, great question. So there are changes at all three levels. The consumer, we think positive change, life will improve, maybe even trust the online lead generation space to submit their data a little more freely and readily because they're going to be in the future making a one-to-one connection the majority of the time. So consumer, we think net positive. I think it's hard to argue with that, really, if you're a human living on this planet, right? With a
Who gets calls they don't want, right?
For the lead aggregators, the portals, lead aggregation websites, it has the potential to change their business significantly. They're one of the most profitable business models in the world because they take they do a bunch of marketing, get one consumer to come in and say, I'm interested. And then they sell one, I don't know, between $50 and $500 lead 20, 30, 40 times in some cases, sometimes to multiple industries, even than the consumer wanted to begin with. And so almost every industry that has some connection to leads has a big presence from lead aggregators. And so their business models are likely to change fairly dramatically. And how that relates to the small business, I'm happy to talk about too, because I think it has a potential to be pretty dramatic.
Well, I think when I was trying to learn about this quickly, my sense is that, one of the things that seems to always happen when there's a regulation, well-intentioned, or they're always well-intentioned, right? But is that it drives up the cost of doing business for some people, at least. That's always the the common knock on regulation. So that is one of the outcomes here, is potentially acquiring customers is going to get more expensive, at least if you insist on continuing to do it the same way. Is that fair?
That's right. I think that's dead on. So we think two things will happen for people, for businesses, for small businesses and medium and large businesses that rely on buying leads from the lead aggregators, which is a not insignificant portion of all these markets, right? We think their costs for these leads are now going to be roughly, and I can explain what I mean by roughly, but roughly 1-to-1. And so we think the cost will go up significantly for that lead. It will likely be a higher quality lead because they'll only be getting calls from you, right? So, but the cost will go up significantly. And the volume of those leads in these industries will go down dramatically. There aren't going to be as many leads going around because instead of selling the same lead to lots of industries multiple times, getting maybe distributing 50 leads from one connection, now you're doing 1 or 2 leads from one connection, right? So we think those are definitely going to be 2 ramifications for small and medium-sized businesses for sure.
Okay. Before we get into other angles on this, are there industries that when this happened, you think, oh my God, industry X, Y, and Z are really going to feel it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's inevitable to me that the mortgage industry, the real estate industry will feel it, the insurance industry, to some extent, the auto industry, to some extent, the travel industry will see some effects from this. But I think, definitely insurance, mortgage, and real estate are going to be affected by this. I can't see.
And how do you think they will adapt, and how do you think they should adapt?
Well, the FCC actually anticipated this, and there's some skeptics that have they responded to my, and by the way, fair skepticism, that have responded to some of the articles that we've written that have said, hey, they're just going to amend the terms and conditions. It's going to be a big long form. They're going to pop it in there at the lead aggregation site, and then nothing's going to change, right?
So more people things people will agree to without reading?
Yes. So the reason I don't think that will happen is I think the FCC has anticipated this as a tactic. They're not super dumb, right? And so they have anticipated this, and they've actually given an example in the brief of how lead aggregators can adapt. And that example is simply, when you gather the customer into your funnel as a lead aggregator and the customer's there, instead of gathering their lead information and then automatically distributing it, you need to provide them with a checklist. A blank checklist is how we think that they intend it, where consumers need to opt into everyone that they choose to provide their lead to and that they opt in to get contacted by those named individuals. That's a pretty dramatic change if that's the way this thing shapes out, right? How many would you go through as a consumer on a mortgage rate website and check, 14 checkboxes or 25 checkboxes, including insurance companies and real estate companies and everything else if you're looking for rate comparisons? No, I check, if I'm a consumer, I think this is the pressure test. I check 1 or 2 boxes and say, okay, I want these people to contact me. Or maybe there's a different model altogether that emerges. But that's the change that the FCC has suggested in the course.
Okay, so that definitely doesn't allow you to drop a longer T's and C's and then have a one box to check, I agree. That would certainly not change anything for most people, right? But that's not what's going to happen. Okay.
I don't think you're going to be able to get away with that. Yeah.
That would be too easy, right? So yesterday we had a little exchange on this, and one of the things you kind of said was that there's maybe, these are my words, not yours, a silver lining in the sense that it might force some changes in customer acquisition behavior and engagement tactics, I guess, for small businesses. Could you talk about that a little?
Yeah. So there are two things I think that can be fundamental changes for this. Some are short term and some are mid and long term, right? So I think mid and long term I'll hit first. Mid and long term, I think this can be a big positive for a lot of the people impacted because, as I mentioned earlier, we can restore a little bit of the trust of submitting your information online. If you know, hey, I'm only going to get a call from the person I intended to get to submit my information to get a call back from, I feel like consumers over time will begin to trust online lead submission more than they do today, and that will benefit the ecosystem. We'll kind of return, I think, to the way digital leads used to work, which is the equivalent of a personal handshake, right? Of a hey, knock on the door of a physical business, and hey, I'd like to learn more about this thing that I'm interested in, right? And so I think that's a positive mid and long-term shift that we'll see from this. In the short term, the easy button for lots of these industries and local businesses of buying these leads in mass is going away. I mean, it's certainly going away in the volumes and prices that people are used to paying. And so we think that encourages them to do things they should have been doing from the beginning, which is establishing their own paid media, lead generation, and nurturing programs, and not relying on the kind of easy thing to do, which is just buy leads that someone else has gathered and generated and nurtured.
Okay, so maybe it's a little harder, but it'll end up being a little better, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say it doesn't have to be hard. There's lots of automation technology out there, baked into the CRMs, baked into your franchise systems. If you're a franchise that the franchisees can use, so there's lots of automation now. That's the good part, and Meta and Google and TikTok and the online channels are really good at generating leads. The kicker is they on average take a little longer to convert than the leads that you buy. And so because the leads that you buy have already, in a lot of cases, been nurtured for weeks or months.
They're acquired at the point of sale almost, right?
That's right. And so what you need to do is you need to start that process of getting your message and your brand, building your reputation, providing valuable content to people sooner, so that when you're ready to gather their lead and when they're ready to transact after gathering the lead, you're there. And the benefit to that is you can get in front of the portals, be the go-to, not have to compete with lots of other people calling them at the same time, and it's going to be a lot cheaper. So those are the benefits, but you have to do it in advance and invest for weeks, or even months ahead of time for those leads to matriculate down across the pipe.
Yeah. So often when these things happen, when there's a dramatic change, there's a shock, and then there's, the shock can put some people out of business or whatever. Is there going to be a shock, and what do you think it will look like?
Yeah, I think there are going to be two shocks. I think the first shock is going to be at the lead aggregator level. That has been one of the most profitable business models that we've ever seen. I mean, no surprise, right? When you can sell $150 lead a zillion times, right?
I wish I was in that business up until today.
They've been printing money for a while, right? So it's a defunding, I think, to some extent. I think it's too powerful to go out of business, but I think there's going to be a defunding of that business model.
What about certain players? Will certain weaker players fall out? I mean, there's got to be some of that. Yeah, okay.
I think they could. I think what will happen, Charles, is they're gonna be forced to spend a lot less money in the paid media channels, which may actually increase efficiency for small businesses who are generating leads themselves, because there's not as much competition. I think the volumes will be high enough of pullbacks. Some of these lead aggregators are spending tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars a month to get people to their site, to nurture them, to generate leads, to multi-lead. They can only
Where's
afford
most
to
of
do
that
that.
money going? Is it going to Meta? Where's that most of that money going?
Well, I think it generally goes to Google number one, Meta number two, and right now TikTok number three, Amazon, LinkedIn, and there's some
they're
others
going to take a hit from this. A significant hit?
I think they'll take at least a short-term hit. Yeah, I mean, I do. So
like a material.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they have
something you'll have to talk about on earnings calls.
They might. Yeah, they might. They might. I think that's an astute analysis. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So wrapping up here on this topic, advice. You kind of said this in terms of changing how you acquire leads, being more direct in terms of your nurturing, et cetera, et cetera. But if let's say I'm a mortgage broker or any of these categories you mentioned, what do I do tomorrow to adapt?
Tomorrow, I say what? Yeah. Tomorrow, I ask myself the question: how much exposure do I have? How many leads am I depending on that are being purchased through third parties every day, every week, every month? So it's the first thing I do. Because if you're not buying third party leads, you're generating them yourselves. You're not going to be as impacted, if at all, right? So that's the first thing. And now, if you have exposure to buying leads through third parties, whether they're brand new leads, aged leads, or otherwise, now I start to look at who can provide me a service. This is going to be enforced in 6 months. So I have less than 6 months because I need to stand something up and start marketing, right?
Okay. That's an important fact. There's a 6 month lag on this. Okay.
6 month prep window. Yeah. So what I do is I call my technology providers. If I'm in a franchise system, I call my franchisor, parent company, and I say, what solutions do you have for me to stand up my own turnkey marketing platform tomorrow? Some of the CRM platforms incorporate lead generation into them so that you don't have to do a lot of stitching together of technology yourself as the loan officer or real estate agent or anyone else, insurance agent. And so that's what I do. First call, technology, CRM, technology provider. Maybe if you're in a franchise system, first call is to the technology group or marketing team at the franchisor. Do you have tools for me? How do I generate my own leads in this new environment? And so to me, those are the first two calls, and your partner should provide you with solutions to these problems. The industry needs to kind of motivate and help everyone in this time. It's going to be hard.
Okay. Final question. How does this impact Evolcalize?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of both, right? We're pro and con. So we actually have technology in at the lead aggregator level. And so we have clients at the large portal kind of aggregator level. And so we expect that to suffer some, right? Because we think, that's going to likely to pull back to some way as their businesses adjust to the new reality. On the flip side, we provide automation technology for franchises and tech providers and CRMs to make this turnkey for every loan officer, every real estate agent, every small business out there that relies on leads or other demand. And so we're encouraging, as we have been, we built a company around this, as we have been for years, folks to, take it seriously and work on putting in place your own demand generation so you don't have to rely on others.
Okay. Final question. Is there anything else coming up from a regulatory standpoint that is on your radar that people should be paying attention to now versus the day the FCC rules on it or some other agency? No is it's a fine answer, but I'm just curious, is there anything else we should, mark on our calendars and to worry about a few months down the road?
Well, there's some other, I think, fairly positive things that went through for consumers that went through in this order as well. The wireless telecom providers are going to be required to cut down on spam and some other things that are going on, which I think are positive. I think the hot potatoes in the industries you mentioned are the real estate commission lawsuits that are going on, led by Slitzer Burnett and the follow-on trials. Everyone in that industry is following that, or you have to be following that if you're not already. But those are all what happens with the in the real estate and mortgage industry based on some of those commission lawsuits is going to be potentially cause a dramatic shift there.
Of the same magnitude as this or greater?
I think for the real estate industry, perhaps greater than this. I mean, when the DOJ is involved and they're talking about removing the 3% buyer's commission from the deal, that's a pretty big change fundamentally to how housing has worked in at least the United States for a long time. So that could be a large positive and negative, a lot of negatives to that, but positive and negative change coming down the pipe.
Okay, perhaps for another podcast. Okay, Matt, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for coming on today and educating us on the outcome of this decision, which I don't know was all that widely covered, to be honest, and up until now. But again, thank you for explaining that and what it means. And I encourage everyone to. We posted something on Localogy Insider about it and encourage you to read up on the topic because clearly it's impactful for anyone in the local digital ecosystem. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. I'm Charles Laughlin. My co-host is Mike Boland. And thanks to today's guest, Matt Marx of Evolcalize. You can find this show on all major podcast networks, and you can learn more at localogy.com. Please subscribe, like, and review this podcast. Your engagement really helps others find us. Our producer is Dara Sweat. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.